See what God's shown me through his word. We're going to be in Psalms chapter 139 this evening, and I'm not going to read the whole thing and go back there and talk about it. I'm going to go through and talk about each verse in each section as we make our way through the psalm. I'm going to pray real quick before I start preaching. Dear God, thank you that I can be here this evening to preach your word and talk about what I've learned, and please help me to speak clearly and to be able to just make sense of your word and be able to show these people what you've taught me. In Jesus' name, amen. So this song, Behold Our God, works pretty well with this chapter. Behold Our God talks about, in the very first line, who, I just forgot the words of it, but something about holds the ocean in his hands and how big and great our God is. There's these attributes to God that are really big, but in this chapter, David brings them personally to him. So let's start reading. It says in verse 1, O Lord, thou hast searched all and known all. Thou knowest all downsitting and all uprising. Thou knowest all thoughts afar off. So as I hope all of you noticed, I wasn't reading it right. It actually says, me. Thou hast searched me and known me. David, this first section, verse 1 through 6, is talking about the Lord's omniscience or knowledge of everything, but he takes and makes it personal. And as we go through this chapter, whenever you see the word me or mine or my, try to put yourself in that position of what David's saying. That's what I did as I was reading this chapter, and it's what's helped me, and I've really liked. It's really a good psalm. So it says, O Lord, thou hast searched me and known me. Thou knowest my downsitting and mine uprising. Thou understandest my thoughts afar off. My thought afar off. God understands our thoughts even before we finish thinking them, and he knows the motive behind every action we take. We can do the right thing, but for the wrong reasons, and God knows all of that. It says in verse 3, Thou compassest my path and my lying down, and art acquainted with all of my ways. There's no difference between our waking hours and our sleeping hours. He's still there surrounding us all the time. He's with us everywhere. I should have said this earlier. The main theme of this psalm is the comfort and sobering reality of God's knowledge of us. So it's equal parts comforting and sobering that he knows everything, but still he takes such interest in just you. That's what he talks about through the psalm. In verse 4, it says, For there is not a word in my tongue, but lo, O Lord, thou knowest it altogether. Even before I say something, God knows it and the attitude behind it. And it says in verse 5, Thou hast beset me behind and before, and laid thine hand upon me. So beset is besiege or surround. So he's saying the same thing. He doesn't just say, O Lord, you know me, and then go to the next point. He takes time to repeat himself and to say it in different ways in his prayer to God. And then it says in verse 6, Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high. I cannot attain unto it. That he's mind-boggled by the fact that God can know so much about him and about everything. So when I read this verse, and it says, Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high. I cannot attain unto it. I thought of, so most of you know my mom and my younger brother out in Wyoming for the past couple weeks, and I just thought of everything moms do, and they can remember that the dog needs to go out to use the restroom, and that the dog needs their food twice a day, and the trash needs to go down to the road on the trash day, which we forgot twice, and I had to take it to the dump on Friday. And she cooks a lot of meals, and now I've been cooking some, and it's just a lot that moms do, but it's nothing in comparison to what God does, or the knowledge God has of us. You can't even compare even how much moms do, which is more than most people, to to what God does and knows. It says in verse 7, this is the start of the next section. The first section is about God's omniscience, knowledge of everything, and the next section is about God's omnipresence, and he's everywhere. But again, everywhere personally. He's right there with us. We can all take this personally and put ourselves in the place of David as this writer. It says, "Whither shall I go from thy spirit, or whither shall I flee from thy presence? If I ascend up into heaven, thou art there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, thou art there." This next section has sort of a question and answer pattern in it in these next 6 verses. But God is everywhere, and we can never escape his presence. Even if we are having a really great day, he's right there with us, cheering us on. When we sin or make our bed in hell, God's still right there with us, and he loves us even in that. It says in verse 9, "If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there thy hand lead me, and thy right hand shall hold me." The wings of the morning and the uttermost parts of the sea, these are two things that is two very unknowns and unexplored. This verse means when we go in, we can go into somewhere we don't know anything about, that's completely unexplored, and God is still right there with us. He's everywhere, and wherever we go, he's there. In verse 11, "If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, even the night shall be light about me. Yea, the darkness hideth not from thee, but the night shineth as the day. The darkness and the light are both alike to thee." So, verse 11, "If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me," it's just foolishness to think we can hide anything from God. We can hide from other men our actions and our pet sins and things we do behind closed doors or in the dark. But God sees everything. He knows the night and the day is completely the same to him. And then this next section, I sort of couldn't understand at least verse 15 and 16 for a while, and I had to call Pastor and ask him what it meant. But this next section is about God's foreknowledge and plan for our life. So he knows he has a plan for us even before we're born. He knows we're going to be there. He knew who everybody was and who's going to be born in the whole earth from the beginning of time. It says in verse 13, "For thou hast possessed my reins, thou hast covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works, and that my soul knoweth right well. My substance was not hid from thee, when I was made in secret and curiously wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Thine eyes did see my substance, yet being unperfect, and in thy book all my members were written, which in continuance were fashioned, and when as yet there were none of them." So the study book I was reading sort of read into some of these books or verses further than really made sense. And the simple explanation is God's knowledge of us even before we're born and plan for our lives. And we should be following God because he has such a plan for us. Then verse 17 and 18 are my two favorite verses of the psalm. It says, "How precious are thy thoughts unto me, O God! How great is the sum of them! If I should count them, they are more in number than the sand. When I awake, I am still with thee." David is just really happy and about all of the thoughts God has towards him. And like I said at the beginning, we can insert ourselves as the me and mine and my in this chapter. "How precious are thy thoughts unto me, O God! How great is the sum of them! If I should count them, they are more in number than the sand. When I awake, I am still with thee. There's the sobering aspect to this psalm, where we would live our life differently if we meditated on this psalm and the truths of it before each day. We would live our life differently because we know that God has such a plan for us and thinks on us as much as the number of the sand, which is uncountable. And then David says, "Surely thou wilt slay the wicked, O God. Depart from me, therefore, ye bloody men. For they speak against thee wickedly, and thine enemies take thy name in vain. Do not I hate them, O Lord, that hate thee, and am not I grieved with those that rise up against thee? I hate them with perfect hatred. I count them mine enemies." David turns from "when I awake, I am still with thee" to his abhorrence of the wicked and his want for the wicked and wickedness to be far away from him. And David shows a fierce desire for the wicked to depart from him. He wants nothing to do with the wicked who rebel and speak against the Lord. But then in the next two verses, the last verses of the psalm, he sort of closes it up with, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts." So he has this sort of an outburst against the wicked. He says, I don't want them to have anything to do with me. I don't want to have anything to do with the wicked or wickedness. And then he says, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there be any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." So the very beginning of the psalm says, "O Lord, thou hast searched me and known me." So God has already searched and known him, but he wants God to continue searching him and knowing him, and try him to see if there's any wicked way in him, because he wants to avoid at all costs being a part of the number of the wicked, or one of the wicked that he talks against in verse 19 through 22. He says, "And see if there be any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." He wants God to lead him in his plan for his life. As we go through the psalm, I was struck by this sobering. You just have to be sober when you look through this psalm and think of all of the thoughts God has towards us. And it's comforting in the sense where when we go through trial in life, God's going to be there right with us the whole time. And it's sobering because we don't want to be sinning against God because of all of his thoughts towards us. If we knew God was standing right there beside us in the room physically, we wouldn't do most of the things we do. And he is, just we can't see it. We have to keep that on our minds. So that went by a whole lot faster than I thought it would. I thought that was going to take a long time, but it was very fast. So that was what I got from this chapter. But that's all.
Amen. Thank you, Nathan. I appreciate you sharing your heart and what Lord taught you through this psalm. Don't you appreciate that? Yes, amen. One thing I was thinking about, and I didn't tell him the end of this because I wanted him to keep thinking about it, keep searching through it. When you got a psalm like this, and you see two different worlds, really. At the beginning, you see him talking about God, everything about what God knows and what God knows about him. And then all of a sudden, it's like David just changes subjects completely. And you're like, what are you talking about, David? Where are you going with this, you know? And I want to tie this for just a second together. He did a good job of going through this verse by verse, which is what I want him to learn to do. Go through this verse by verse and bring out the truths that are in these verses. But sometimes it's difficult is to look and see kind of a big picture. And he alluded to this concept earlier in Psalm 179. Look at it in verse 8. In he said, well, verse 7, whether shall I go from thy spirit, or whether shall I flee from thy presence? If I ascend up into heaven, thou art there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, thou art there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea. And these are things that are just really big thoughts, the uttermost parts of the sea. They say that we haven't explored 90% of the sea or something like that. I mean, it's just a huge number, And yet God knows all of it. And it's just a kind of an overwhelming thought for us, isn't it? It's just a macro level of picture of what God knows. But even then, God's hand guides him. Even on this earth, in every little detail, God knows every bit of it, and God knows him. And I was thinking about this as he was preaching. Sometimes when my little ones get hurt and they need doctoring, and I'm daddy doctor at times, and I have to clean the cuts, and I take the splinters out, and what else do I do? Those things. Anyway, tape things up, bandage, things, put medicine on and all that stuff. And this is what I do. And I remember Autumn. Autumn has had some weird things happen in her life. She had a piece of metal fall down on her pinky finger and break her pinky finger. And it was, serious. She had to get that thing repositioned and put a pin in it, and all that stuff. It's kind of some serious stuff. She had her head knocked with a big metal pole and had a couple of staples put in her head. She's been through it to be such a little thing, And whenever she gets hurt and comes to me, I tell her the truth, don't I? If it's going to hurt a little bit, I tell you it's going to hurt, don't I? But if it's not going to hurt, I tell you, you can trust me. This part is not going to hurt. But if it is going to hurt, I tell her, you can trust me. This is the part that's going to hurt. It'll be real quick. I'll get it over with, and we can move on, And I'm real honest with her about that. Why do I do that? Well, because I want her to know she can believe everything I say. I don't lie to my kids. I tell them the truth, even if it hurts sometimes. I tell them the truth. And this is what I was thinking about with David. I tell her that before I have to do the daddy doctor thing, whatever it is, if it's getting a splinter out or whatever. I go ahead and up front, I say, okay, you remember back when you hurt your finger? Yes. Do you remember when you hurt your head? Yeah. Do you remember back when I had to do this? Yeah. I said, did I always tell you the truth? Yes. All right. So I'm telling you the truth right now so you can relax and let me do what I need to do. You see, her knowing all this stuff that I have told her to be true helps her to go through the difficulty ahead. You understand? Now, what is David doing right now? What is much of David's Psalms written doing? Anybody remember? He is praying to God, right? But why? What's in life? What's he going through? He's running from Saul or Absalom, his son. Either way, his enemies, right? He's running away from his enemies. That Absalom was against him. He was being rebellious. But anyway, he was running away from his enemies, and he's just like so frustrated, right? David's so frustrated. And so here in the last part of this verse, it makes sense that he is kind of like, I hate the wickedness. He says, surely thou wilt slay the wicked, O God. Depart from me, therefore, ye bloody men. You can hear the frustration on David. But before he gets to all that bad part, before he gets to that bad news, it's almost as if David is talking himself up. And folks, we need to do this every day. We need to talk ourselves up. You remember years and years ago? This is old. People used to joke and laugh about looking in the mirror and talking to yourself up. All right? It's saying positive things about yourself. You're beautiful. You're strong. You're smart. And I don't know if that works or not. I'm not vain enough to stand in front of a mirror and try that. But I am not going to do it, all right? If you do it, good for you. If it makes you feel better, fine. But years ago, they used to do that, and man, people like me, just make you feel good about yourself. But it's as if David is seriously talking about what God knows before he gets to the bad part. And we need to, in the mornings, speak to ourselves in the Lord before our day starts, because we don't know what that day is going to hold for us, right? The good and the bad. We don't know what's going to hold for us. But no matter what, look back and think, what does God know? What does God know? Man, He knows everything. You know me, my down sitting, my uprising. You knew me when I was in my mother's womb. You knew everything. Your knowledge is everywhere. All that being said, I know I can trust you. I hate my enemies. I hate them that hate you. God, let me not be like them. And it's as if David's just talking himself up, knowing he can trust his God before he has to face his enemies. And what a challenge it is, and what an example it is for David to say at the very end, search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts. See if there be any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way of everlasting. He just commits to God. He says, God, I hate those that are wicked, and those that are hating you. I don't want to be like that. Let me not be like that. And all this this information before this just solidifies his heart that he can trust his God, because his God is 100% in control. And you did good. You saw those things. You didn't put it the way I put it, but you saw those things. And that's good, Nathan. Thank you so much for going through that, digging a little bit, and letting the Lord speak to your heart through that. Our God's good, isn't He? Yes, He is. And I'm thankful He's given us the direction in His Word. Well, let's stand to our feet, and we'll be dismissed in a word of prayer.